Hello and welcome to Housing and Economic Development. I'm the host, Michael Shea. This is a program on Arlington Independent Media where we talk about housing and economic development. Affordable housing has been a big issue in Arlington County recently, and it continues to be a problem for the county as it tries to find a way to make an inclusive community work for everybody. So to talk about that today, we're joined by Mike Pitchford, who's the CEO of CPDC,
right,
an important nonprofit group in the region that has been for many years now working on affordable housing issues. Mike, thanks for coming on the program.
Good to be here.
All right. Now first, let's give our viewers some background. How did CPDC get started and what is its business model?
Sure. So CPDC is a not-for-profit affordable housing developer, and we were founded in 1989, so we're coming up on 25 years next year. And we were founded by a for-profit developer by the name of Gene Ford. Gene has done thousands and thousands of units in the greater metropolitan area and actually in states east of the Mississippi. He found there were certain things that he couldn't do as a for-profit developer. Thought they would be better managed with certain not-for-profits, and he's a very creative and thoughtful guy. So back in 1989, he found a colleague of his and he formed CPDC, and the rest is history.
And what are some of the programs or services that you typically get involved in your organization?
Well, at first, as any startup, the company was really a lot about just getting the first couple of transactions, finding properties to do. And as it evolved over time, though, we began to get more focused on the residents and their needs. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you meet the test of safe, decent, affordable housing as a starter, what else can you do to enhance their living experience? You and I maybe live in communities where, you know, there's a community association, for example, or something like that, and we live in Arlington County where we can get our needs met pretty easily. There's a variety of services and that kind of thing, but a lot of the places we work, that's not really the case. Mm-hmm. So we try to organize the residents, we try to get a sense for what their needs are as well, whether they're after-school programs, adult education kinds of things. My favorite joke with senior properties is they'll add to the list a ride to Atlantic City to gamble, and we don't do that part, but there are a lot of other things that the senior populations need and will tell you, and you can kind of provide for those needs as well. So we've continued to build on that model over time, went through the process of doing it ourselves, and have now gone, like a lot of our counterparts, folks that you've talked to, who bring in third parties, other partners, other not-for-profits who are very good at this kind of thing. We provide the space, they provide the services.
Right. They rely a lot on volunteers
by
them
yeah.
and volunteers other places. All right, so what are some of the bigger projects that you've been involved with or the organization's been involved with in the past?
Well, the company over that 25 years has done over 5,000 units. So we've got, and we're sort of DC Metro focused, although we have recently done a property in Norfolk, Virginia. Okay. Have a deal coming up in Baltimore, Maryland as well. If you look back in our history, our fairly recent history, we completed a 410 unit property in Ward 7 in the district. We completed a 317 unit property in Ward 8 in the district just 3 or 4 years ago. A little bit more recently, actually just maybe 6 weeks ago, we did a grand opening for a property that is just, you know, a stone's throw from your studio here. It was a great deal. That was a naturally occurring, affordable property that in the dynamics of Arlington could have and was sort of headed to the point where somebody was going to grab it and it was not going to be affordable anymore. Right. So using the tools that are available to us, low-income housing tax credit and things like that, we were able to kind of grab that and preserve that as an affordable housing stock for the county. And
your staff must bring in a wide variety of experiences and expertise. So what are some of the skill sets or knowledge areas that to pull off something like that do you have to have?
Well, that is with any of us, you know, a developer, I joked about their job as really being not complicated, they just have to worry about everything. So if you really think about that developer's role, I mean, they've got to start on it, find the property, find the lead, find the opportunity, help to figure out how it fits in the community, how it would work for affordable, what healthy is going on around it or not. You know, the worst thing you can do with affordable housing is try to put a stake in the ground in an area that is otherwise very troubled without the resources to fix that trouble. You kind of, what I tell my students when I do a little teaching in this, I call that a donut hole. You don't want to build a donut hole. You want to be able to kind of make sure that there's healthy tissue around you. So they start off worrying about that, and then they will go through the planning for it. They have to have a little architecture in their back, a little engineering in their back pocket. They have to be able to be financial wizards in some form or fashion, because it's a very complicated financing process, as I'm sure you well know. And then they have to kind of have that sort of stick-to-itness to see it all the way through to its completion and the tenants coming in. All the while, they've actually got to think about who's going to live there.
Right.
So it's not just the sticks and bricks, it's what do they need, you know, how's it going to work for them, bring in our resident service folks, figure out what that profile is going to be like, how big should the community space be, what's its purpose going to be. It's a very complicated job, and that's just the developers' roles. Right. The folks that we have, and it's actually more than half of our workforce that does the resident services work, and they're just coordinators. They're just trying to focus on what the needs of the residents are and finding the resources out in the community to come in and meet those needs.
And you mentioned the stick-to-itiveness. What is a typical sort of time frame for a project, from when, sort of from the concept phase to maybe you've got a facility that's open?
Years.
Years.
Yeah, it's always years. It can be more years than I want to count on a number of occasions. You know, when you could go through several years of just the planning process, a year of kind of getting something financed. You know, the cycle for low-income housing tax credits is lengthy. So it's always years, but then the construction periods on the scale of deals we're typically doing are 18 months, 24 months. So real estate operates in slow motion. It's the reverse of dog years. You just have to watch it slowly develop.
And so 18, 24 months, that's about for several hundred unit development. That's
right.
Typical. Right.
Right.
Now, what was your own background? How did you get into this?
Well, I'm a recovering banker. I spent 24 years in banking, retired early, and the last dozen or so years of that, I had the pleasure of working in the bank's community development division. And in that particular bank, Bank of America, they were doing actual development, not just lending or investing in some form. So I ran a division that developed about 23,000 units over the course of that 10 years. Coming out of that, I thought, well, you know, that's what I want to do. And I got out, well, it was a good time to get out of banking, you know, before bankers really had a bad reputation as they do these days. So, and got into, you know, very respectable profession of building affordable housing.
So you made your mother proud?
I did. She's very happy with me.
So what are some of the projects now? What's going on now that's sort of in development?
Well, we have adopted a new strategic plan about 3 years ago, always kind of operating one, and we did a pretty wholesale change to it. We're in the process of revising it a little bit now. But in that plan, we decided that there were two key things we wanted to do, which was to get a little further out of our comfort zone in terms of the local geography. Most of what we have is really Metro Washington, the surrounding counties, the district, Anne Arundel County, which is not quite surrounding but close enough. And we wanted to get further into Baltimore, get some opportunities there. We wanted to actually go down into the cities of Hampton Roads. Funny story, we were on our way to Hampton Roads one time, and we stopped by in Richmond to see Susan Dewey, who heads VHDA, the Virginia Housing Development Authority. And Susan says, well, don't forget Richmond. So we looked in Richmond as well, and as it turns out, right now, we just closed our first deal in Richmond. In September, we closed our first deal in Norfolk, and we've been awarded the deal in Baltimore. So that's the geography. The other piece of that is to work with public housing authorities in what I'm going to call generically their privatization efforts. They call it conversion, but there's a move with public housing authorities to try to get their stock more into private hands as a tool to recapitalize them. So the deal in Richmond is actually the privatization of about 200 units of senior housing, senior public housing, as is the deal in Baltimore.
So part of, as an organization that was DC Metro, you kind of understood DC, understood Maryland, understood Virginia, that gives you the scope to move to other areas of each state in that sense.
Right.
Because a lot of this is reliant on the state funding.
Absolutely.
And the state.
Yeah.
You know Virginia, you know Maryland.
Right, and I don't want to go any further at this juncture than Virginia and Maryland. Working in two states in the district is complicated enough.
I'm sure it is. Okay, so and what are is anything being developed in Arlington or closer to Arlington?
Yeah, well, we just finished our first property in Arlington, which I was mentioning earlier, and we're certainly ready to do the next thing in Arlington. Now, Arlington is a very rich set of developers already, not-for-profit developers operating here.
Right.
So it would be a kind of a competition-rich environment. I'm happy to work here more. I think we have a very good relationship. We keep an eye on those things. But some of the other places, particularly Norfolk, where there isn't a not-for-profit of our scale operating there at all, the opportunity seems great.
And there is a lot of need in Norfolk for affordable housing.
There is a lot of need.
And a lot of community groups have been organized to try to push that. Probably anxious to see a developer come in like that.
Right.
What else can you tell us about the strategic decision? Is the organization going to grow a great bit? Okay, so what's the
the nuances to me, and it I hope it's more broadly interesting because I think there are some good lessons in it. But we transitioned over that time, like a lot of folks in our industry, from being worried about the sticks and bricks, getting it developed, getting it built, to worrying about the residents and thinking about them more and what we can do to enhance their lives. And then most of us have kind of transitioned through the do-it-ourselves to the do-it-with-partners kind of approach. I think the next wave of that is actually what we're calling resident engagement. So that instead of asking the residents in a variety of ways what to do, we're trying to do a little community organizing and build them up into a way where they will tell us more on a group basis what kinds of things they need, and frankly coordinate some of it themselves. So it's a different level, again, a model where you or I might live where there's a resident association and we're on that association and we're doing things that are important for that community. Right. I think that's a powerful tool. It's a very empowering kind of a tool. So that's one element of our future, and I think that is a future for the industry.
And if you look at properties that are being developed, not just by you, but maybe in the industry, and you analyzed how much sort of typical development, common space, apartment unit, is the common space maybe growing a bit? Because part of what I think, if you're going to try to engage the residents, if you give them the playground for them to use as a playground, that's also where they're going to meet and talk about their problems and come up with this common. So do you think you're building bigger common spaces?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really a critical feature. You have to have a place to meet and come together, and the playground doesn't always work. And of course, developers, the sticks and bricks part again is easy. Right. Do you need a little bit more space? We had a property in Annapolis, and there were a lot of kids there. And one of the simplest approaches to that was to bring the local Boys and Girls Club in as a partner. We built a 3,000-foot branch office for them, effectively, on the site. They staff it. They bring in a lot of resources. They can also get the kids on that property over to their main facility with their own bus network. But it's a wonderful, kind of a tool. And then when they're not using it, it's still available for the other residents to do, their own meetings or adult education or other kinds of things. So yeah, having that space and having it be multi-purpose, so that it really, can get used in a broad range of time is really important to the residents.
And in general, do you feel like you're fighting against the tide of state and federal financing? Has that become more difficult in the last 10 years?
Oh, sure.
So how have you come up with a way to offset that, or what? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's really very there mean, complicated is maybe not the right word. Troubling is the right word. There was a point in the lead up to the Great Recession that there was a lot of capital available, and tax raises and other kinds of things being what they were, the various government sources were quite comfortable with putting extra capital in to make a deal work. So even though prices were rising, we were all creating what I call a Smith Island cake, which is the cake with like 7 or 8 or 10 layers, and so it's a Smith Island cake of financing. There's this level of financing, this level, this level, this level. You put it all together to make the cake of a deal. So we have to really be able to kind of do that and arrange all of those kind of component pieces on a regular basis. And these days, there's some layers that are missing. The county or the city or the state don't have the same resources. Home funding, which has been coming from the federal government to the through the municipalities, has been cut by more than half in the last few years. Local municipalities who have relied on real estate tax revenues to generate certain funds for affordable housing have seen those dip so low that they don't have those kinds of sources either. So it's become much more difficult and troubling, I think, to arrange that financing these days. Are you finding you're working more partners, or maybe is the industry having to collaborate more to offset that? They are. Yeah. The interesting thing about where I believe the industry is going is trying to move towards putting some of their own capital in. So if you will, most not-for-profit developers have a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in a deal, but not really their own capital because they didn't have any. Right. But the most recent deals that we've had to do to cover some of those layers that aren't out there anymore from whatever sources is to put some of our own capital into them. And that's, the deal in Norfolk, we've got about $1 million in it, which would have been unheard of some years ago. So that's an important next step in the evolution of the industry, I think. We are all advocating for what we're calling enterprise finance, a model where we're financing each deal, getting a mortgage, doing all those layers, but those layers come in a larger chunk so that we don't go through the pain of financing each individual asset. There are a lot of models in Canada, in the UK that operate exactly that way and seem to have a much more effective kind of programs for the development of affordable housing. Well, I'm sure my son would support more financing, but particularly if you made the metaphor that layers of the cake are missing. He would be totally with you. He'd want those extra layers. He would want those extra layers. He understands. I would. You would. Makes me hungry. Yes. So we've already started to talk about kind of what's next, but can you talk maybe a little more about what might be next for CPDC? Sure. Yeah. Well, so let me come from a big picture kind of down, because there's a growing recognition that we're going to be very short of affordable housing, and it's a simple supply and demand issue. If you go back through the Great Recession, before the Great Recession, as a nation, we were building 1.3, 1.4 million units a year of housing in total. Right. A certain portion of that was affordable. So during the first 3 or 4 years of the Great Recession, that number fell to less than half. All right, so you're down to 500,000 or 600,000 units that you built, and the demand didn't go away. It just, kids come home from school and live with mom and dad. People double up, families live together, right. Those kinds of things. But the immigration and the population growth has still continued. So if you project that forward to a recovering economy, which I think we're all seeing, the housing starts have gotten up to about 1 million units a year now. Not really to the historical level, but they're getting close. We're going to see a shortage, and it's really going to come down on affordable housing, right. Because the natural, again, supply and demand tools would suggest that, well, what was once affordable is going to just rise up the food chain because it's in demand. So the Washington Post actually, I think, covered it in a very recent article suggesting that there's a serious shortage, and I've been thinking that for quite a while. Yeah. So that's one macro kind of issue. So right. Take it down to CPDC's level, micro now. We're trying to do a couple of really important things, most of which is preservation, most of which we've done is preserving existing stock. So instead of something that could get snapped up by a developer and turned into a condo, or snapped up and rehabbed and turned into a Class A apartment, we can use the tools and preserve it. That's right. One important step. And we haven't done much new construction, but we're starting that as well as a second component of our first new construction deal coming up out in Reston here shortly, and really looking forward to that. Is, maybe just because of the financing of it, is the renovation an important part of preservation? Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't, to keep it affordable, construction might not be an option. Right, it is. If you really, if you think about the sunk cost in that structure, there are a few deals that are obsolete in their shape or their footprint or something else that they're so old, but for the most part, mm-hmm. It's you've got a building that can be renovated fairly easily. Right. The one we did in Arlington just recently, we actually did a little bump out to add bedrooms to some of the units to make them a little more family friendly, but the basic structure right. was built in the early 50s and is still there. and pretty well built, I might add. So it's a green thing to do. There's the greenest building you can do is the one that's already built.
Right.
So for starters, and then the second is, yes, there is I believe a cost savings renovating even as thoroughly as we do with kitchens, baths, floor. I mean, they can be gutted, but there's still a structure there and a foundation there, and utilities and other things you're not paying for again.
Right. And that's, in this area, certainly, there was so much housing built immediately after World War II that we're not at a point where it can't be renovated. A lot of the structures can be renovated,
Absolutely.
so that certainly works.
Yeah.
But market forces might drive even something that could be renovated into a construction because someone's going to grab it and make it the Class A talk about.
Right.
So you got to fight that.
If we're all in a housing shortage, if that number doesn't get back up there, and as soon as your son or my son are ready to move out of the house because they got the degree and now they got the job, or whatever else, that demand is out there and it's gonna bite us.
Well, and as you know, they think they're ready to move out of the house before they are.
Well,
so
that's a whole different issue.
That's a whole different
I think
issue.
it's a different interview.
Yeah, that's a different issue. That's the parent hour.
Right, there you go.
We'll talk about that. I guess I want to get maybe a little more into the future. So you're going to stay within Maryland and Virginia, for the most part, CPDC. Right. But are you looking at any other areas within each state that
we are
kind of on the radar?
Yeah, so in our sort of second wave of trying to tweak our strategic plan, which we're operating under now, we want to stick with the urban areas. So Richmond, Norfolk, the other cities in Hampton Roads as well. Baltimore, and of course continue to work the markets, all the counties around the Beltway and the district as well, and do that. We're also going to try to go to a new level of community development that I don't think we've really been at before, and that is to really look at a community, not just a property, and say, all right, this property is going to work well in this community or not if I do X, so that we make that decision before we even make the investment, and or we do the things that will change it. Right. So for example, great property, great community, healthy tissue, but there's a bad retail strip down the street. What can we do to make that retail strip better? Buy it, tear it down, get somebody else to come in there, convince the owner to kind of change it in some way. Is there a charter school that could be built nearby? Is there some other asset? Is there a retail center that we could help attract in? So that's one version of the kind of community development, in addition to making sure we've got our own space for the community to meet in that we talked about.
And you probably need community allies to make that work.
Oh, absolutely.
Even just from an idea sharing perspective, let alone the actual task of trying to improve something.
If you were in the business of the way we were, where you're just doing a transaction somewhat in a vacuum, you don't have quite the same needs. But once you open up and think about it as a community venture, particularly doing the resident services, you need partners to do that. And there are any number of partners that can come in and help you actually get the community done in a broader way.
And do you find that your staff has that kind of community experience, not just the development experience, that they do?
I don't. It is something that I think we have to learn.
Okay.
And we have to kind of observe, but we have to really ask ourselves the probing questions, the honest questions. How is it going to work? What is this liquor store hangout down the street really going to? Can we fix it? That's going to be a problem. What can we do about it? Right. And so it does add a layer of complexity to what is already a complicated development process.
And particularly if you're thinking about reaching into other parts of each state, you're kind of, until you get involved in that community, you're kind of the outsider organization. Right. So you may not be able to.
It is.
You have to overcome that.
Absolutely.
Somehow.
Every place, there's a different political structure. And at the state level, I grew up in Norfolk, so I have the good fortune to have some connections down there still, and went to college there, so I can make a few connections, and I remember the neighborhoods. Not that they haven't changed in a few years, but I still can drive around down there.
You don't get lost.
Yeah, don't get lost much. And Richmond, of course, is a place we don't know as well. But again, you've got to go in there and meet the council people and the people that you need to help support you on the layers of that financing cake. So it is, there's a limit to what you can do effectively if you're going to be in the market to stay. If you're going to be a community developer, you've got to kind of build that set of relationships.
But certainly, you're bringing in a reputation and an experience being well regarded in the communities you've already operated in.
I hope so.
You're not making a cold call on a community.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do. And after 25 years almost, we should have some sort of a reputation, and people can check us out, and that should help bringing us into some of these new communities.
Right. Anything else you wanted to get across? Any about the new vision or the new activities?
Well, the other element of the kind of the new vision is this the sort of community development approach. We're also going to be trying ourselves when the opportunity presents itself with some mixed income and mixed use kind of communities. I think that's a logical way. If you grew up in Norman Rockwell's America, it was a mixed income community, right?
Right.
Just de facto. And we have really, with zoning and other things, gotten away from that. So there's a well-to-do enclave, and we've all heard the stories about warehousing the poor and those kinds of things that have happened. So if you take the next logical leap to community development is creating mixed-income communities that really work.
Right.
So that is on our list, and then mixed use, where we might build a building that has ground floor retail in it, or some other kind of service that is more than just a community center of some kind.
Which transit-oriented mixed use is
Absolutely. Arlington is such a wonderful, transit-oriented
place. A lot
place.
of experience to learn from there.
Yeah.
On that issue, are you finding a receptive audience to that ideas in Richmond and in Norfolk about mixed use? Do you find there's some efforts in the community for that in those areas, or maybe
I do find some. I mean, Arlington is way ahead of the curve in that respect. I mean, when I moved back here, when I left banking and moved here, I moved to Arlington specifically because you got 5 council members, they've got their act together, they've been thoughtful about transit, I mean, all those things that really make for a good working community. Mm-hmm. I love that. The fact that I had a son at Virginia Tech, I get in-state tuition was only part of the deal. But it was, all of that was really kind of very important. Yeah. But yeah, it's so you do live in an environment where you see it every day, and in the rest of the state, and in Maryland at various locations, it's a little bit trickier to do. But I think they're seeing it.
Well, we'll have to have you back and just talk about Maryland versus Virginia.
Sure.
Because that's a very interesting topic, and I'm sure there's a lot of differences we can explore. But I'm glad you came on the show, and this has been a very interesting program. I also want to thank our volunteer crew here at Arlington Independent Media. They've been terrific. We've had David Cervantes and Patrick McCleary on camera. We've had Hilary Freer and Steve Cordle in the booth. But most of all, I do want to thank Mike Pitchford for working with CPDC so hard to make not just this community, but many communities a better place to live.
Great, thank you.
Thanks very much.